Mania. These people seem insane because weird sex stuff in particular drives people crazy. So, perfect example of this, our assistant health secretary, Big Dick Levine, he goes by Rachel now, but his real name is Richard. So Richard Levine, that Ed Feser, the philosopher, reminded us of. He posted this to social media. It's a line from Plato, from the Republic. And the line is, all the pleasures of a dissolute life produce the sting of mania. Then the master passion runs wild and takes madness into its service. Any opinions or desires with a decent reputation and any feelings of shame still left are killed or thrown out until all discipline is swept away and madness usurps its place. Isn't this the reason why the passion of sex has for so long been called a tyrant? Under the tyranny of the master passion, one becomes in his waking life what he was once only occasionally in his dreams. And there's nothing, no taboo, no murder, however terrible, from which he will shrink. His passion tyrannizes over him, a despot without restraint or law. Every man who has ever lived knows that this is true. What Plato is saying, brought to us by way of Ed Feser, which is that the pleasures of a dissolute life, in particular, sexual passions, when you let your sexual passions run wild, it produces a craziness. It produces a mania. You do things that you would never otherwise do if you were in command of your faculties. Even at the most basic level, when you get a little too into a girl or something, you say, oh, why did I behave that way? Why did I say that? I was acting totally crazy. And certainly when you follow really deviant desires like these people are doing, it leads them to do really crazy things, like dress up like a woman, like go into the middle of a church and start shrieking obscenities and degrading yourself and calling yourself a whore and calling your deceased loved one a whore and all, just totally wacky, crazy stuff that's obviously contrary to nature. That's what happens. And if you don't bring that passion into line, if you don't discipline that passion and order it toward its proper place, it is going to tyrannize you. It's going to drive you crazy to the point that even otherwise rational, reasonable people will look you dead in your eye and tell you that a man can actually be a woman. One of the most absurd claims you could possibly make. Otherwise normal people with degrees from Harvard and Princeton and Yale, people who work at fancy jobs, people who work for the federal government will look you in the eye and tell you that. Not because they've arrived at some amazing scientific conclusion, some new discovery, but because they have allowed their sexual passions to become so disordered and so exaggerated that it's going to totally overwhelm their reason. Reason be damned, they're going to follow their bizarre lusts. That's what happens. Plato knew it. The great doctors of the church knew it. Every wise thinker has known that for all of history. And yet today we throw that out the window and we pretend that there's some kind of right for a man to be a woman. You can say there's a right to it, but it can never happen. So what kind of right is that? It's not a right, it's a wrong. And wrongs aren't rights. That's why we call them rights. So then all we're left with is the mania. These people seem insane because weird sex stuff in particular drives people crazy.